Sexual assault is not a crime of passion. It is about the abuse of power. And that is precisely why it is one of the most serious allegations anyone who cares to be a public servant can be accused of. Sexual assault is about the abuse of power.
Last week, Bernie, suspended his campaign and endorsed Joe Biden. And now, are you going to be able to do the same thing, given the fact that everyone's initial thought is to get who out of the White House and get some semblance of, intelligence back in? Do you think it's time to have a conversation with Joe?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I think right now, just the stakes are too high when it comes to another 4 years of Trump. My community especially has been so impacted. And it's, for a lot of communities, this is an issue of life and death. We've had kids in cages. We've had a pandemic response that happened way too late that has cost us lives. We have people that don't have access to critical care that they need. I think it's really important that we rally behind our Democratic nominee in November.
I feel a little bit giddy to do the next introduction. It is my great pleasure to introduce Congresswoman-elect Ocasio-Cortez.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all so much. Thank you. When I was a child, I was sitting on a fence in front of my home. A car rolled up. It was a beat-up old sedan. Was it blue? Was it red? It's hard to tell in a child's memory. I was sitting there. The car rolls up. The driver's door pops open. A man comes out with his arms to grab me. He picks me up off the fence. My mother rips out of the front door, her hair dryer, the cord freshly ripped out of the wall, and she screams. The man drops me, takes up his car, and drives away. That was my first encounter with the police. At 16 years old, I was taking a ride on the New York City subway system. An older man taps his shoulder. He must have been 40, 45. He said, "I like your smile." It was full of braces, and I was wearing a backpack. At 18, 19 years old, I was here in the city of Boston, going to a party on campus. I saw a girl getting flung over her shoulder, unconscious, at a frat party as a boy hit her up a second story. Everybody looked, but nobody said anything. Years later, I was working as a waitress in a restaurant, and every woman I worked with, I shared and we commiserated our stories of sexual violence and assault. Sexual assault is not a crime of passion. It is about the abuse of power. And that is precisely why it is one of the most serious allegations anyone who cares to be a public servant can be accused of. Sexual assault is about the abuse of power. It is always women who are marginalized. It is the young, it is the interns, it is the immigrant, it is the trans. They are always most at risk because society listens to them the least. And that is why a man believes that an elite education, a high income, and his rich friends can get away with sexual assault. That is why I want to thank every survivor that is here today, that is allowing themselves and everyone in this country to be re-traumatized over and over, because people like Dr. Anita Hill, people like Anita Hill and Dr. Ford have to sit there in front of panels of 11 men. Could you imagine if Brett Kavanaugh had to sit in front of a panel of 11 women of color deciding his fate? Could you imagine? Could you imagine? Could you imagine how he would say this is an injustice when really the opposite is business as usual? But with your help, and on November 6th, we're going to change it, because we're going to say that if you are going to continue your career aiding, abetting, covering, and being complicit in sexual assault, we will end your career by electing survivors to office. We're doing it. Massachusetts is doing it with Sister Ayanna Pressley right here. We are going to keep pushing, because justice in America is not just about protecting the powerful. It is about uplifting the voices who have been victimized and who need to be held, whose crimes need to be held accountable for all. Justice for all is radical in America. Justice for all. Justice for the poor, justice for women, justice for the queer, justice for trans, justice for poverty. That is what we are fighting for, the radical rule of law and justice for all in the United States of America. Thank you all very much.
Last week, Bernie suspended his campaign and endorsed Joe Biden. And now, are you going to be able to do the same thing, given the fact that everyone's initial thought is to get who out of the White House and get some semblance of, intelligence back in? Do you think it's time to have a conversation with Joe?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I think right now, just the stakes are too high when it comes to another 4 years of Trump. My community especially has been so impacted. And it's, for a lot of communities, this is an issue of life and death. We've had kids in cages. We've had a pandemic response that happened way too late that has cost us lives. We have people that don't have access to critical care that they need. I think it's really important that we rally behind our Democratic nominee in November.
So, Congresswoman, some progressives are suggesting that with Bernie out of the race, they'll vote third party. That would be a catastrophe, in my opinion. What do you say to those people? And also, part two, Biden has made some efforts to appeal to progressives, like lowering the eligibility age for Medicare to 60 and expanding student debt forgiveness. Is that enough? I think. Thank you. Yes, I think, and I think that they're connected questions. I think what's really important is that we do realize that at the end of the day, one of these two candidates are going to be elected president of the United States. It's either going to be Joe Biden or it's going to be Donald Trump.
And I think it's important to, communicate some empathy. I know for a lot of people, this was not the outcome that they may have wanted, and this was not the choice that they wanted to make. But ultimately, when it comes to those two, I don't think it's particularly close in terms of what communities will be made more vulnerable. And I think but what I also think is really important is that the way to I think move in a unifying direction, as I said before, is that unity isn't a feeling, it's a process. And I think that that Biden can go further. I think that it's not necessarily enough. Lowering Medicare to 60 by 5 years is still more conservative than what Hillary Clinton proposed in 2016. Hillary was talking about lowering it to 50 4 years ago. And so I think that there's certainly room. I think that there's going to be room on issues like immigration, Puerto Rico, healthcare, climate change. And I think that it's healthy to do that. And I think it's what we shouldn't do is recreate this dynamic where we are kind of finger wagging and nagging people into voting because it's not a way of generating enthusiasm. I think one thing that we can do is improve the policies that we have as a party to tell young people, to tell all sorts of people, we see you and we have a plan for you, and we're going to create hope for all sorts of communities in the United States.
Now, Vice President Biden's been very clear that he plans to pick a female vice president. You're not old enough to be eligible to run with him, but do you have any suggestions for a female vice president, someone that you'd like to see on your party's ticket?
I think what's incredible is that we have a lot of talented women of color who are leaders in this country, whether they're in Congress or whether they're in the Senate. I mean, whether they're governors of states or whether they don't even hold elected positions at all, but had held elected positions. I think what's really important is that it's a combination of two things. One, of course, to have our first female vice president and to have that be a woman of color is a significant milestone. But the other thing that I think is important is, what does this woman value? What policies does she champion? And that brings it more, that's the difference between us just talking about a token and us talking about substantive, incredible leadership. And so in terms of who that is, it's really hard to kind of to point some out because there are leaders out there. But, I don't think we have a shortage of them. That's for sure. I would love that woman to be progressive as a kind of a counterbalance politically.
Right. Well, keep your thinking cap on because, we're going to ask you again.